Hey everyone, this is Heger Herger, and I am here to do my first impressions for episode number 5 of season 8. Just got done with the episode, and now I'm here to give you my first impressions, what I liked, what I didn't like, and other things that just caught my eye when going through the episode on the first pass. All right, so to cover first impressions, I was not big on this particular episode for a couple of reasons, mainly tonal. It obviously this is a much darker episode we have than a lot of the ones that we've seen recently. This would certainly rack in tonal wise with the Red Wedding, Hard Home, and things along and episodes along that line. This was not a happy. There's no warm and fuzzy on this one at all. Now, unless I have a lot of requests for it, I don't particularly think I'm going to be doing a in-depth battle analysis. If you're really interested what I thought of this particular battle and how it went, you could just listen to this video and it will cover everything. So I don't think unless there's requests for it, I won't be doing a dedicated episode. So let's get to the guts of it. Episode 5. Okay. Yeah, first thing I thought was when Varys was writing on the scroll. It's like, yep, so much for the secret. It is now exploded. And, well, Varys did say that he is out to protect the small folk first and everybody else be damned, in terms of kings and the aristocracy and so forth. And I give him massive kudos for keeping by his convictions, even though he knew he knew somewhere down inside that it was going to get him killed. The whole where power resides riddle to Jon Snow. It's nice to see that it was a callback. That whole um, that whole exchange seemed extremely rushed. It felt like they could have probably used about another 30, 45 seconds in order to be able to deal with that particular conversation. It seemed a little rushed. So Lord Varys's ultimate death came as no real surprise. I had actually been talking to friends of mine and pointed it out that his survival was his survival was finally over. The big fish, yeah, he's not swimming anymore. When Tyrion entered the tent after telling the Unsullied to go away and seeing Jaime there chained to the tent pole, I was thinking to myself, well, there's a situation he's familiar with. He spent enough time with Robb Stark's army being shuffled from one place to another and, well, being chained to a tent pole. So, hey, that should be familiar to you, Jaime. I'm not surprised that Tyrion ended up freeing his brother. Um, it's kind of mirroring the the freeing of Tyrion when he was being falsely accused of Joffrey's death. Um, I think that uh, I think that it was a good way to kind of end the relationship between Jaime and Tyrion, although they were kind of going. If everything had gone according to plan, and when does anything ever go according to plan? Uh, Although this episode is the epitome of that. Um, that they were never going to see each other again, one way or another. One of them was going to be dead uh, after everything is said and done. So I thought it was a nice little wrap up. I did like Tyrion's line when he said, a trade for thousands of innocent people for one moderately innocent dwarf. I'll take it. I did like that line. And just as an aside, when we got to this particular scene, there was something that actually struck me. If you take a look at that building on the right-hand side of the screen, the first thing that came to my mind is that it looked very much like a fort from, say, the 1800s, specifically the mid 1800s, because it looks like some of the forts from the American Civil War, and that was one of the first things that jumped out of my mind when I saw it. So obviously an older fort, but not nearly as old of a fort as Red Keep in Westeros is to portray, because that fort there, that's more for the age of cannons than, ballistas and stuff like that. And speaking of ballistas, I was looking at the way that they had the ballistas. Yes, they are big. They are bad. I do not doubt that they have a lot of power behind those arms. But I did notice something almost immediately. Those guys they don't have much of a elevation and depression angle. Maybe plus minus 30 degrees. You can't. Yes, you can crank them around 360 degrees. You could see by the way the platforms, where the ballistas are in relation to the platforms that they're mounted on. They're obviously designed to be cranked around all the way. But you're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to, have them pointing down or pointing up all that far. So you probably only have. You don't have much of an ability to shoot at things that are not at a large distance away, in terms of up and down, which with a little careful planning would, there's a great big hole in which you can't cover, which is straight up. And as soon as when I was looking at the ballistas, and as soon as I realized that, I said to myself, if Dany has any brains whatsoever, she will come in directly on top of them and get the first strafe. And if she was smart, now obviously she was able to negotiate all of the shots. I don't know what the stats are, but when you're talking actual warfare, the amount of fire shot into the air, much of it is wasted. It never touches its intended target. And these things are not fast firing. A small Scorpion ballista that was in use by the Roman army. I don't remember the stats on it, but they could get it loaded and shot every night. I think it was somewhere between 30 seconds and 90 seconds to be able to load, crank the arms back, the string back, load, and then be able to fire. So that's not a rate of fire that's anywhere near quick enough in order to be able to get rid of a dragon. Neither the Ironborn nor the Lannisters were really had the ability to be able to shoot a low, fast-flying target that was in very close. The Scorpions, ballistas that they had, there was no way that they could do it. And when Euron showed up later in the episode, I wasn't really surprised, because there was we didn't see him engulfed, and if he's not engulfed, if somebody doesn't isn't engulfed in flame in Game of Thrones, they're not dead. Although that covers most cinematic, regardless of whether it's TV or movies. If you don't actually see them get engulfed in flame, then they're fine and they'll survive. I thought that the out at the gate, when you have Strickland, although I still say they got the wrong guy to play Strickland, in front of the Golden Company, and then you had the reverse gate smash. I thought that was actually very clever. At that point, coming in underneath let's just call it the anti-air fire of the ballistas and popping out the gates was actually a very nice a very nice little twist, showing some forethought. Now, there's something here that I want to address. I have listed it in the tactical assessment of Winterfell, which is still in process. And evidently, this is a Westerosi thing, because you will not find this in major cities or fortresses anywhere else in medieval Europe. There was no gate complex. It was nothing but a single door. We saw that here in whatever gate that was. We saw that at the Mud Gate during the Battle of Blackwater. We saw that at the Battle of Casterly Rock. We saw that at the both at the Battle of the Bastards and the Battle for the Dawn. Of course, those last two were all at the same locations, but a proper proper medieval gate has two gates. It has a gate and a portcullis, and then maybe 15, 20 feet, and then another gate, or a portcullis, and then another gate. This would be found in any gate complex, whether it be city or fortress, and they don't have that here. I am going to assume the fact that building a gate complex like that is quite expensive, both in terms of real world expenditure if you're making a castle or a walled city gate, and it would also be pretty expensive in terms of set design as well. So I'll give them that, but it gives me, like many things, it gives me twitches. I was also kind of curious about the open formation that the Golden Company has right outside the gates of King's Landing. Although I could also see that as being a concession to the fact that you have a dragon flying around, and dragon flyer is a nice area of effect weapon. So if they're really packed tight, then you much more people to kill in a single pass than if it was a little bit more open. And warriors of the medieval time, especially as a group as professional as the Golden Company, would be able to react quickly on a more small unit level, in order to be able to go from dispersed formation to packed formation as needed. That being said, the Golden Company failed. Period. They held discipline pretty well, and then until they didn't. After the gate break, or actually after the gate burst, they crumbled. They routed, and I have to ask, it's like, Why? The Golden Company is absolutely famous for its discipline in battle. It is, and both on and off the field when it comes to, the way they keep their camp is extremely ordered and extremely disciplined, probably akin to a Roman legionnaire, which had a very organized methodology to it. And nobody, and as I said in the tactical assessment of the loot train battle, nobody formed up again. Not a single person. There was no there was no cohesion. There wasn't even an attempt for anybody to rally. They just, there was that one shot, and then they scattered. So it's like, oh man, that is such a fail. Then there's the scene where Davos and John and Grey Worm end up pushing their way to the front, and you have the uh, Northmen, Army of the North, and probably a few Vale soldiers as well, facing off with the Lannisters across a little bit of a intersection. It was a multiple way intersection, if I remember correctly. Um, and I also noticed that the guys in front, they had they just had swords. Okay. But the guys behind them had shields. They had their open field, open battle kite shields like we saw in the loot train. And all I could think of, why isn't anybody barking to get their asses up to the front of the mass? Because then if they were able to form a proper shield wall, then they could have held. But, evidently nobody amongst the Lannisters were thinking. And this was obviously for for cinematographic reasons. I understand it, but from a military reason, it's like, oh God, no, that's wrong. Then there was the scene at the outer gate for the Red Keep itself, and when they closed the gates, um, there of course was, a riot press, a press of people up at the gate itself. And this just conjures up images and descriptions of all of those horrific occurrences at concerts, at sporting events, you know, at, and where, mass number of people are, just whether just they're just panicking or just intent on a direction, and people are crushed to death. This was just like the epitome of that. um, One of the things said about the Battle of Agincourt is that it was um, a mass an accident from mass people just waiting to happen, the way that particular battle was laid out. And this reminded me much of all of the descriptions of, of the concerts and of all the various big crowd crushes that I've heard about over the course of my life. And then Danny goes all wild, goes all Targaryen Mad Queen. Things were going so well. The Lannisters at that point were surrendering. Many of them would have heard stories of the sacking of King's Landing during Robert's Rebellion. There might even have been old veterans there who remembered sacking King's Landing. And they knew how that, and they very quickly saw how this was going to go. And Danny just couldn't keep her rage in check. Things were going so well, and then it became a fight. Then it became a fight because at that point, um, the Lannisters knew that they were going to die either way, and at that point, they would fight harder before bending the knee before capturing. It's like that. There was a conversation in the I don't remember the release date, but the movie of the Battle of the Bulge, and one German officer um, was reprimanding, I believe it was actually an SS officer, is like, why did you shoot the prisoners? That will just make them fight harder. Why you just made our job so much harder? And that is a perfect example of what was going on here, because every one of those guys knew at that point he was going to die anyway. So why not die fighting? Um, on the blind chance that he might actually be able to get out and survive. And then after that point, John and Davos and anybody else who was in charge in a position of leadership was could not keep control of their troops. You cannot keep troops in control like that in that particular situation. And what we see here, aside from the Dragonfire, is exactly what happened the last time King's Landing was invaded by a hostile army. That was the violation sack of a city, and as ugly as you could conceivably show it on TV. What did Jorah Mormont say to Dany? Every man has a beast in him, and if you give him a spear or a sword, it's going to come out to the surface. And this is what we saw. Now, we didn't see it on screen. I even went back just to see if I could find it, but we followed Grey Worm for a little bit with the fighting, and then it peters off. You stop seeing him, so he's still alive. Um, so there was one character death that I was calling, but evidently hasn't happened yet. This episode is also left in doubt what's going to happen to Drogon, on account of he hasn't died yet. Um, I still maintain that the dragon will end up being, well, I did maintain, and actually I still do, that the dragon will end up dying. Grey Worm will end up dying. Varys is dead. Missandei is dead, which leaves only Tyrion and Grey Worm as advisors to Daenerys Targaryen, and I suspect, and I still think that what's going to happen is Grey Worm's going to die, and Tyrion is going to betray Dany by walking away out of just raw necessity, leaving her completely and utterly alone. So, as I said before, it was no surprise when Euron came out of the water to confront Jaime at the lower back end of the Red Keep. Um, that fight, I thought, was done pretty well. Doesn't matter what time period you are. Two guys fight realistically. They're going to end up on the ground at some point. Punching will end up being wrestling. Now, yes, Jaime got his cut to his left arm. He also I was looking at it, and that stab wound was on the right hand side, or sorry, left hand side, just at about where the ribs stop. Now, I'm no medical person, but the pancreas is in that area, the spleen is in that area. That blade was long enough to have reached the liver, undoubtedly perforated bowel, and possibly even stomach. So there's really no recovering from that without some immediate and rather extensive medical care. So at this point, Jaime's dead. Euron called it, and if it hadn't been for the falling rubble, then Euron definitely would have been right. Although I have to say that when they were, rolling around and punching at each other, Euron gets a throat punch. Now he recovered from that pretty quickly. You don't recover from that very quickly at all. It's like getting your knee banged right there, or hitting your funny bone, or another common occurrence, a kick to the groin. You know, in TV and movie, people recover from that really damn fast. Now, I understand for reasons of time crunch, but not in a fight. You get a kick to the balls or a throat punch in a fight, you're done, because you're not going to be able to. You're stunned, and your opponent's going to be able to attack you freely. And then we had Clegane Bowl. Finally! Now, a couple things, kind of before we really get into it. There was something that I noticed back in season 7 when I was looking at the Kingsguard. And looking at their upper body. Yes, their breastplates and their pauldrons looked, their upper arm armor looked very impressive. The helmets looked very exotic, but not completely out of the realm of possibility, I guess. Although they were clearly more ceremonial than functional. The thing that irked me the most was the big honking gap, like you can see here, between the helmet and the upper body protection. All there is a cloth. Yeah, and cloth is such great protection. So there's no place there. There's no gorget. There's no bevor. There is nothing there to protect the neck. And there isn't even, you see it in certain medieval representations, and you actually probably see it more in a lot of popular fantasy video games, where you have that shoulder plate that comes down over a protecting front and back with a vertical plate sticking straight up. There's a reason why you have that. So when a sword comes from directly from the side and is a horizontal shot, across the upper body, that it doesn't go directly to the neck and kill you. Well, we see the Hound dispatch several of the surviving Queen's Guard, or specifically the last one, by throwing a shot, aiming a swing to exactly where the armor isn't, and pretty much opening up the guy's neck, leaving him in no condition to do anything but expire. Another thing that I noticed about the Clegane Bowl fight is something that I don't think I have seen more than a handful of times. If I really, really, really thought about it and went back through all of the various medieval movies that I have seen, I think this is the first time in which I actually saw armor function like armor. There were several blows, at least 2 that I could think of right off the top of my head without reviewing the video, in where Sandor struck at the chest of the mountain. And of course, what happened? There was a clank and the sword bounced. That is exactly what armor is supposed to do. Armor is functional. It's not a costume. You don't stab spears or swords through plate. That's not possible. You don't swing your sword through plate. It's not possible unless you've got something like a lightsaber. But we're not talking those. We're talking actual physical swords. Armor stops edged blades. It stops edged weapons, whether that be an axe or be a sword. It will stop a spear, both in thrust and, I don't know, maybe a slice. The plate does its job and stops stuff. The only thing plate does not stop is a blow from a mace or an actual warhammer. Not these huge, massive mauls that you see Gendry and Robert Baratheon wielding, or a pole axe, because their warhammers, and I use that in quotes, are the size of pole axes. That concussive force will go straight through the armor, and if you're not padded, will go straight through the padding. The padding will slow it down a little bit, and at that point, do untold amounts of damage to your insides. Concussive force is the only way to get through plate. A sword won't do it, and a spear won't do it. And it was nice to see that they actually showed that in action. When it comes to the rest of, or should I say the ending of Clegane Bowl, I wasn't exactly surprised that the mountain went to the eye gouging, head popping, death of the Red Viper move on Sandor. So that didn't come completely as a surprise. I am glad that Sandor was finally able to kill his brother, and oddly enough, did it with fire. Although I get there is no satisfaction from Clegane Bowl. It just there's no satisfaction there. I'll put it this way. And when it comes to the death of Cersei and Jaime Lannister, it was harped on again and again in the books, so they obviously brought it in. They obviously did not go with the Valonqar prophecy, which probably would have been more interesting to watch. The whole idea of in the books was they came into the world together, they're leaving the world together, leaving us with crushed beneath rubble. Here was another death that I found incredibly unsatisfying. I'm not exactly sure. They seem to try to bring out Cersei's humanity. I don't know why. She has none. I felt no sympathy for her whatsoever. My reaction to the sequence was to growl at the screen of just die already, get this over with. And the fact that they, the two of them were buried in rubble. There's no way to confirm the kill. There is no way that anybody could. There's any way anybody could close the door on, a possible return of Cersei Lannister or whatever her child would be to, there will be no Bonnie Prince Charlie of Westeros, if you will, raising a kid in foreign lands, and just like what happened to Dany. Without a body, there's always that particular possibility that the leaders and people in Westeros, to wipe out that possibility, to have it come back again. And it now also leads open to possible pretenders. I don't remember the name of the individual. This happened with the British throne at some point, where some Dane, I think it was a Dane actually, that tried to say that he was a an heir to the throne, and he was proven to be false. But without that closure of the death of Cersei, there was, there's always that possibility of something like that happening in the future. Now we also saw a lot of shots from ground level, showing the, you know, generally showing the whole horrificness of the situation of, a city being sacked and violated. I don't want to use the correct term for it because YouTube will flag this video, so I don't want to quite do that. Um, this was done. Now I realize this was done purposefully and to show, the general horrificness of the whole situation, and also to completely give us justification for having Danny dying in the next episode, of which I now hope happens. Um, I always figured if she went Mad Queen Targaryen that, she would have to be killed, and I'm calling it that she will need to be killed. Hopefully Arya will do it. And speaking of Arya, there were two things that I noticed. Arya is going to have long-term problems from concussion issues. This is the second time in this season that she has been knocked around and, hit over the head and, obviously taken a blow to the skull, knocking her out. So I'm not a medical practitioner. I don't know what that does to somebody, but I do know that in the U.S. military, combat personnel are taken off of combat duty when they've received too many concussions. So at the rate she's going, she's going to be in perfect line for that. The other thing that I noticed was the final sequence, actually, in the show, where she wakes up from being knocked out for the second time in the episode, and she walks out, and this is after Daenerys has finally stopped flying around or has moved on to another section of the city, and Arya comes out from the alleyway and looks at the mother-daughter pair that we were quasi introduced to, and that she had to leave behind in the street. And of course, in keeping with Games of Thrones, any character that you are introduced to, however obliquely, ends up dying, as did this mother-daughter pair. And you're looking at the charred remains of their corpses, and the first thing that came to mind was those concrete statues in Pompeii. The ones that they made from finding holes in the ground from where people had been buried by the pyroclastic flows when Pompeii, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Herculaneum and Pompeii. And, they're left where they are and, laying down, covering their faces, and, stuff like that, where they've basically been cooked. And I've seen photos of them. I've never been there myself, but I've seen photos of them, and I had the exact same kind of the exact same kind of reaction to that. It was very eerie, and the director did an excellent job in portraying that. And then there was that last thing. There was that one lone horse. Not particularly panicked. Couldn't tell if it was like a Dothraki horse in which, the Dothraki lost his rider or whatnot. There was just a single pale horse. And I don't, I'm not, I know the passage, but I cannot quote it. Uh, you know, something about a guy on a pale horse and and death being on the pale horse. So at that particular point, I was thinking to myself, "Oh, please don't let this be a post-death vision. Please don't let this be a post-death vision." And I really hope it isn't. But it, Arya, the assassin, and almost death incarnate herself on the back of a pale horse. There was something very fitting, and I don't even have the words. I don't have the words at the moment in order to be able to articulate how that was just like appropriate, foreboding, warped, and well done all at the same time. Um, so all in all, it was intense. It exactly portrays what that kind of conflict in an urban area with dragons that looks exactly like it should be. Um, I do not have. Now, this is not exactly the kind of episode that would have a warm and fuzzy attached to it, but I really didn't care for it. I think this is not an episode you're supposed to like, and even knowing that this is supposed to be a dark, foreboding episode, I did not like it. I had no problem with Hard Home. Um, as brutal as it was, the Red Wedding was fine, but this one I don't like at all. So that's what I thought of episode episode 5 of season 8. If there was something else that stuck out in your mind that I missed, or you agree with me, disagree with me, whatnot, put it down in the comments below. If you liked the video, give me a like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next week.